So yeah, we're gonna talk about poetry, literature, and exile, and how do we, as writers, translators, poets, how do we see this? How do we look at exile from different perspectives?
What is it in exile that, what is that characteristic of exile that would affect a writer for you, like you, for instance? What is it in it, and if there are historical examples that we have that it shows that exile was an element in their writing?
Yeah. I guess as a coming from Arabic literature background, historical example would be a very good example is the movement of Al-Hajjar, which is known as the Poets of Exile, which was a movement that started by a few poets who were exiled in Europe and left their countries. And this movement is now a whole category of the Arabic literature. It actually opened up a few different aspects of the Arabic poetry. So I guess the movement is there, and the exile and literature have always been connected since of it from the oldest history and until today. And for me personally, I guess that exile affected on my poetry, changed the way I look at my poetry, made me redefine things, redefine the meaning of my poem, the meaning of homeland, of identity and all. So it's an opportunity at the end of the day, as Edward Said once said. It's a state of plurality of vision. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I mean, to me, exile was. I can't imagine myself like without being in exile somehow. It's totally changed your perspectives, your identities, and it like creates, I think, two identities at the same time, which some poets speak about, like Mahmoud Darwish. He always have this two identities that maybe he talks about, whether it's when when he left to Lebanon or to Europe. And it's interesting how you start developing these identities, and of course the things that we learn from exile. I think from myself, I wouldn't learn in my country because of the limitation we have, and our like maybe perspectives in Syria is totally different than here. And meeting people from Malaysia and all over the world, I think that's one of the things that I don't take for granted when it comes to exile. So
I think what is important is that when we look at when is art created, a lot of times it is when that daily routine, constant way of living, constant situation in our life perhaps is affected. When we talk about exile, of course we talk about the forced movement of people, things that ordinary citizens of the world perhaps would take for granted. For instance, in the country that I am staying in the place that I am staying in, how many days are left for me to stay here? Thinking about your legality where you are, just because you are breathing in one part of the world, for instance, all of these gets bold, gets highlighted, and it becomes bold in your life. You're thinking about it actively, that I am here in this place in Southeast Asia, for instance, and you can and you are counting how many days are left that I am here, thinking about who you are. Your features are now mattering. For instance, for poets, that he is inside his own country, for instance, who he is might not be that much of a thing to think about, but the way you look, the way you are interacting with people, where you are staying, how many days you are staying. All of these are pushing you, or all of these are affecting you as a person. You are thinking about them. So the point is that exile becomes an element in our thoughts always, whether we think about it or not. When we are in exile, things affect us. And a historical example that I have in head is one of them is Rumi, for instance, himself, who was born in the modern day of where is Afghanistan today. People speak Persian in this region, and then because of the attack of the Mongolian from Central Asia towards those lands, he was forced to go all the way. He went to Damascus, met Ibn Arabi, and then from there he went up to Turkey, and then he got the name Rumi, which means
foreigner.
Foreign, exactly. He became known as Rumi, and it wasn't his name, but because of the place that he was in, he took that as part of it. So it is an opportunity, of course, but it is always with hardship. So here is maybe we can ask Masuma that. I'll ask her in Farsi. که شما چه تأثیری داره وقتی می‌نویسی این که یک افغان بودی که در ایران به دنیا اومدی و بعد مثلا مجبور شدی به افغانستان بری، اونجا یه حالت غریبی داشتی و بعد در مالزی اومدی و حالا همه اینها آیا تأثیر روی نوشتن داره؟
آره مثلا تمام این تجربیاتی که من از طریق این مسافرت از طریق این کوچه اجباری واقعا تجربه کردم، همه اینها یعنی تأثیری داشته که نگاه خودم شخصا مثلا موقع نوشتن خیلی عمیق‌تر باشه، مثلا نسبت به بعضی مفاهیم مثل مفاهیم درد، دلتنگی، جدایی، یه مفهوم و یه نگاه خیلی عمیق. شاید مثلا اون نگاه عمیق رو هر کسی نداشته باشه، اما من تو نوشتم همیشه اون درک و اون نگاه عمیق رو همیشه داشتم و واقعا یعنی با پوست و استخوانم، یعنی خیلی از اون کلماتی که تو شعر مثلا یا تو نوشتم استفاده میکنم شاید با تمام پوست و استخوانم اونو درک کرده باشم، مثلا حس کرده باشم، تجربه کرده باشم.
She says all the experiences of exile, those forced migrations, have made the depth of her thinking. It gave depth to concepts like pain, concepts like love, like different things, different concepts that she named. All of these has given her the ability to think more in depth of what that exactly mean. It has changed the perspective. It's all about perspective. Perhaps when we go on a journey, it's perspective always. It's that we go, when a tourist goes somewhere to see something, it's all about seeing. However, this journey was forced to a lot of writers through history because of what they were writing. For instance, Milan Kundera in Czechoslovakia of the time, he was forced out of his country and
out of his language. Also.
And out of his language. And it is very interesting that you write in English and you have also written in English. What is it in exile? Is it what exile have given you, writing in another language? And what do you feel about it?
I mean, I will ask you because I've originally written in English before in Syria.
Even in Syria.
I have written a few Arabic poems, but my most writings were influenced by Western poetry, so that's why I write in English. But I think to you it's
it's a different experience for me because I've never written in English. Although I learned English, I learned French, but I've never thought in English or French. But there's this idiom where you are living in the language. When you start living in the language, it's only then when you start writing in a new language. And this new language would mirror a few new aspects of your face and of your identity and of who you are, how you think. And what is it that matters the most in a poem? Is it the thought, or the feeling,
Or the language.
or the language? What are you trying to do with your poem? And this made me think of my language, the language of my poetry, not the language as a concept of alphabet or sounds, but the language of your poetry is your thoughts, your emotions, and your work inside the poem. English gave me a different path to walk through. But also, talking about how exile can open new different paths to you, and roads and all, there's also a fear of losing your cultural identity. That fear of how do you keep one uniform cultural identity? How do you balance? What do you get? What do you lose? And talking of that, I would of course mention Mahmoud Darwish, because Mahmoud Darwish in his poetry, the one who said, I went north, I went east and west, but I couldn't go south because south is my country. He went everywhere, but he couldn't go to his country, which is very strong, a very strong statement saying that I could go everywhere, but not to my country. And by that, Mahmoud Darwish, for any Arabic speaker and anyone who knows the problem of Palestine, and know that with Mahmoud Darwish poetry, he created a homeland in his poetry for millions of people, for millions of those who migrated, those who lost their country. Palestine for them is Mahmoud Darwish's poetry. Very interesting point, because he kept his land and he transformed it from a physical thing with borders into an endless world of words. So how do we keep our identity? How do we maintain the identity that we inherited?
I feel like it's a legacy that will live with any artist. Work is the legacy that they live in, whatever that it is there, and it's that immortal part of them that would be there. But it's very interesting how, when I read your poems, for instance, I relate a lot, and I am thinking what it is about all of us that from different places in the world, 3 different nationalities, for example, sitting here on this table. There are thousands of kilometers in between, actually, even if people think that whole region is one place.
Yeah.
What is it that we have so much in common? What it is that I felt so close to someone like Milan Kundera, and I saw that you also had that. Is exile that something that we all have in common? For instance, that has become a universal a state of being that any poet perhaps has experienced it, because exile could also be that separation from the beloved, whoever or whatever that beloved has been. In Hafez's poetry, you always see that exile and that longing of being in distance, and that distance that it is affecting, that is where the pain is coming, and when you can't reach Mahmoud Darwish, who can't go to south, but it is all about the south, everything that he has written.
And this actually reminds me of a very good point, that you can be exiled in your own country.
Exactly.
And maybe this is like something that Masuma went through, how she felt exiled in her own country. So what's homeland and what's exile in this situation? Maybe Masuma would love to.
درباره اینکه چطور تو خود افغانستان حس غریب و حس توی تبعید بودن داشتید یکم صحبت؟
به خاطر اینکه من حس غریبی رو تو افغانستان خیلی زیاد احساس می‌کردم، چون تو ایران به دنیا اومده بودم، با اون فرهنگ بزرگ شده بودم، درس خونده بودم، چون درست فرهنگ مشترکی داشتن، اما یه بایدها و یا نبایدهایی بود که واقعا فرق میکرد نسبت به اون جامعه‌ای که من رفته بودم. اونجا یه جامعه مثلا سنتی تر بود، به خاطر فقر و طی سالها جنگ زیادی که تو افغانستان بود. خب جامعه از دچار کمی فقر فرهنگی شده بود، یعنی کشیده شده بود به همون سمت مفکوره‌های سنتی یا همون خیلی وابسته به بایدها و نبایدهای مذهبی بودن جامعه. و وقتی که من مثلا توی یه جایی که مثلا به زن ارزش قائل بودم، من به عنوان یه زنی که تو جامعه بودم، بعد وقتی که برگشتم در افغانستان، اونجا به زن با یه دیدگاه دیگه نگاه می‌کردن، میگفتن زن فقط باید بشینه تو خونه، اصلا حق درس خوندن نداره، حتی به اسم نباید مثلا صدا کسی ما رو صدا میزد در اون حد. یعنی فشار و ترس بود. به خاطر همین من تو کشور خودم حتی واقعا احساس غریبی میکردم، چون به عنوان یه زن نمیتونستم آزادانه برم درس بخونم، نمیتونستم آزادانه حتی مثلا برای خودم یه نظری مثلا حتی داشته باشم در اون حد. یعنی حتی در حد یک اظهار نظر ساده من حق نداشتم. به خاطر همین غریبی رو با تمام وجود حس می‌کردم. غریبی به عنوان یک انسانی که تو حق زندگی داری، حالا جدایی از هویتت. یعنی من حتی هویت زنم تو اونجا، مثلا من که یه زن بودم، مثلا حتی هویت جنسیتی منم حتی اونجا زیر سوال میرفت که حالا بماند هویت‌های دیگه‌ای مثل هویت‌های جغرافیایی.
She says she was in fact feeling like a stranger in Afghanistan because she was born somewhere else. There were a lot of cultural differences from where she was and where she went, and there were a lot of things that were affecting her. For instance, she grew up in a place that the idea of who is a woman was very different than where she went, and that identity, even the identity of being a woman, was being challenged there. That, for instance, a woman should be the person who is always at home, and all of these was making her thinking that this is not the place that she belongs to. But that itself, that not being able to even be in that gender was a challenge. Aside from other identities that she had, that it was all gone. Like she wasn't accessing who she was. Like you couldn't be who you were very well. And there is, I think there is element of pain in Exile, definitely. That it is an element of every art, perhaps, the element of pain. So from entertainment, if we consider that as art, but pain is there, and I think artists have been so generous to say that. It helped them, although we all know that the suffering is not something that you want to experience. That nobody wants to experience pain, but they have made something out of it, and it gave depth to the work. Would you consider that as an opportunity, the pain? If we could go back. Could we change? I mean, of course we can't change it, but if you think that if the whole situation in Syria hadn't happened, or do you regret that situation? Do we regret that?
I mean, we never. I would never say that I appreciate the pain or appreciate, the memory of war or the memory of losing the country. But I would say that. If I go back, I wouldn't change what happened, because it was meant to happen, and this is how we actually we went through a whole different road of discovering what's Syria for us as Syrians. But there is this, which is very interesting that you mentioned this. There's this idiom in Arabic literature that we call al-alam al-abqari, or the very smart pain, that always it always inspire you to write in a different way. And I guess that pain is a state of continuous revelation. There's this revelation. It's revealing curtains for you, and you see more clearly. So you can touch on things that you never thought that you can reach, actually. What do you think, Abdulsalam?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, most of the poems that I wrote, I think, were written out of pain and, like thinking about what I've been through, what we've been through. But I want to say something about exile itself. Like when I left Syria, I wasn't knowing that I was going to exile. I think most those who were exiled, when they were going, they were still having hope that I will come back soon, or I'm not going to exile, because exile is a scary word, and it's a huge word in Arabic. So I think like in the beginning you're still having this like feeling of, yeah, I'm coming back, I'm going back soon, one day I'll go back, and then slowly the exile starts to really like form, and you start feeling the exile, and now you say, okay, now I think I'm in exile, and it's interesting to stay in this journey, and then you see how your writings are changing in this period of time. And one of the things that you mentioned about the cultural identity, that's that you're afraid to lose it, and it's true. Most of the times we feel lost, between here and there, because sometimes you feel like you're a Malaysian, you live here for a long time, and the culture, the people, and you feel like, yeah, I belong here actually. But then sometimes you feel, no, I don't belong here. I don't belong in Syria. I don't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that you start questioning yourself about in exile, like, where do I belong? And I think most people who are in exile share this same things. Do I belong here? Do I belong there? And one of my favorite lines in Mahmoud Darwish poetry is أنا من هناك أنا من هنا ولست هناك ولست هنا, which is I'm from there, I'm from here, but I'm not there and I'm not here. So it's like it's very powerful, and it's very simple as that, Yeah, I think
we can think of a line that we have in Persian. Hushang Ettehaj, one of our contemporary poets, has written a poem about a contemporary musician, Mohammad Reza Lotfi, a great master of tar and sitar. There is a line in it that he says, چه غریبانه تو با یاد وطن مینالی من چه گویم که غریب است دلم در وطنم. He says how like a stranger you are, غریب, the word غریب, you are playing or you are mourning to the memory of Vatan, which is the home. What do I say that my heart is qarib, like a stranger in my own home, and being a stranger in home is of course something. But I think in general the question that they asked, of course, we can't do anything about the reality of the world. The war has happened. We are forced out. This is what has happened. I think it is our way of surrendering to being surrendered to what to the reality with that work. An artist will show that I mean the pain is there. What can we do with it? This is it. We can record it, for instance. It can be here. At least we remember this. I mean, it's all about creating memories, perhaps. What a artist does in exile.
And ironically, art can be actually a state of resistance and a state of surrendering to
Exactly.
whatever you're living. I guess exile is, as Abdulsalam described it, very interesting. A scary word. It's really scary and it's really big and it's really huge to discuss. But I love the thoughts that we improvised. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Masuma, Amin, Abdulsalam.
Thank you.
Thank you. A Night Scene in KL is a poem from Poetic Entropy, my first collection of poetry that was published last year, 2019, via Grab Budaya. مشهد ليلي في كوالالمبور. أطفأت ضوء اليوم متكئا إلى قلبي وقد أمسكت دفتر ذكريات البارحة وبدأت أقفز بينها وأعد تلك الذكريات الجارحة. الأصدقاء خراف تخت الغربة الواسع ووجوههم خدر لذيذ دونما الواقع. سأعد كل وجوههم حتى يساورني النعاس ويختفي صوت الأرق. لا بد أن الذكريات قصائد المحروم والليل الورق. أبراج هذا العالم المبني من عرق العبيد تبث فيه الضوء في كل اتجاه، والضوء يبحث عن خفافيش ويضرب كل ثانيتين وجها نافذة فيضيء أصحابي على الجدران أخيلة ظلال، والجرح ثبت في الخيال ركائزه. وهناك في قلب المدينة سائح يمشي ويحمل دفترا مستذكرا أهليه إذ مروا هنا حيث استباحوا الأمكنة، لكنه ما عاد بعد اليوم سفاحا ولكن صار سواحا لأجل الأرض والإنسان. وهناك خلف السائح المشغول بالتصوير والتفسير والإدلاء بالآراء رجل يبيع العمر للغرباء، للناس الذين سيعبرون ويعبرون ولا أراهم يأبهون بشأنه وبابنه. وهناك مهموم حزين يقرأ القرآن يشحذ من جموع الخارجين من المراقص منتشين ويقول ما معناه جنات وتجري تحتها الأنهار حيث نكون فيها خالدين. هذه المدينة لا تحب النائمين المحتمين بثوبها، لكنها ترتاح أكثر للضيوف الراحلين. ويمر ضمن الليل ليل والشوارع تحتفي بهبائها، وينام كل العاشقين على وسائد شوقهم، وتضج أركان السرير على أحاديث الأرق، وأنا ألوح للرفاق وللحكايا والطرق. A Night Scene in KL. I turned off daylight while leaning to my heart and held the memoir of yesterdays. I started to hop among memories and count the ones that hurt. Friends are sheep of the vast bed of emigration. The image of their faces is a sweet and unreal numbness. I shall count all their faces until sleepiness embraces me and the sound of insomnia disappears. Memories must be the poems of the deprived, and night is the paper. The towers of this world, built over the sweat of slaves, are emitting light in all directions. Light is searching for bats, hitting every 2 seconds the face of the window. My friends are reflected on the walls, silhouettes and shadows. And the scar has its teeth deep in imagination's skin. Right there, in the heart of the city, a tourist walking with a notebook, remembering his people. When they walked by here, when they violated the places. He does not shed blood anymore. Instead, he became a traveler for earth and humanity. Right there, behind the tourist who is busy with photographs, interpreting and giving opinions, there is a man selling lifetime to strangers, to the people who will cross over and are crossing, I see them not caring about him or his son. There is a sad, pouting man reading the Quran and begging for money, asking the masses coming out tipsy from the dance clubs. He says something like, "Gardens beneath which rivers flow, wherein we will abide forever. This city does not love the ones who sleep, using its dress as a cover, but it is more comfortable with the leaving guests." Within the night, another night passes by. Streets are proud of their own dust. Lovers sleep on the pillows of their longing. The pillars of the bed are abounding while insomnia talks. I wave for my friends, for the stories and the roads.
My name is Amin Kamrani. For this Georgetown Literary Festival, I want to read two poems. One, a translation of a poem from my poet friend Mwaffaq Al-Hajjar from the book Poetic Entropy that was published last year from Grab Budaya. I will read in Persian, the Persian translation of a poem titled The Conservation Law of Balad. قانون حفاظت از ترانه ها. پستچی شهر من یعنی شهری که به آن هجرت کردم و نه شهری که از آن آمدم، چرا که آنجا دیگر شهر من نیست، که شهرها عادت به پارو زدن دارند در رودهایی از مردم. آنها چون قایقی تفریحی حرکت می کنند، می گذرند از سالها و دورانها، بیان که هرگز به مردگان و شهیدها بیندیشند. شهرها هیچگاه به غم شاعرانه آنان که رفتند اعتنایی نمی کنند. شهرها این گونه‌اند که تنها آنهایی را پذیرا می شوند که بقا یافتند. پستچی شهر من، منظورم شهری است که به آن هجرت کردم. آدم عجیبی است، می‌داند که مرد تنهایی هستم، که پس از بامداد به خواب می‌روم و این چنین عاشق شعر هستم. همچنان از من می‌پرسد هرگز زنی را دوست نداشته ای؟ پاسخ می‌دهم چه کسی عاشق مردان گمگشته می‌شود؟ زنان گمگشته، از پنجره بیرون را نگاه کن مرد عزیز. عاشقان بر سنگ فرش‌ها خطها می‌کشند و به فقیرها شعر یاد می‌دهند. آیا اینها را بیهوده هر روز می‌نویسی؟ آیا هدف را، معنا را، جوهر را دریافته‌ای؟ در هر صورت آیا نامه‌ای برای مردمانتان داری که من بفرستم؟ خنده زدم و گفتم نه، چیزی ندارم که ارزشش را داشته باشد. شعر دیگری نوشته ای؟ خندیدم و گفتم نه، من نه تمری دارم و نه مقصدی که معنایی ارسال کنم، اما درباره آن سرزمین نوشتم و درباره جزئیات رها شدن از اساطیر آن قبیله. با این همه هنوز مقداری زمان نیاز دارم تا تمام مرگ را از درون خارج کنم و تصاویر را به هم بیاویزم. همچنین نیاز است تا طرفین شعر را تعدیل کنم، چرا که نمیتوانم قبول کنم رابطه ای از علم پیروی نکند. اصل معروف حفاظت از انرژی یا قانون حفاظت از ترانه ها. ورودی: 1. اشک‌های قلبم. 2. آن لحظه طولانی سکوت. 3. ولگردی. خروجی: 1. تأثیر پذیری از درختان. 2. صدای آب در قرنیه. 3. هیجان بر صورت یک بازرگان لحظه. از کلامی دیگر، انگورهای شاعران فرسوده شرابی است در قلب‌های آنان که گوش می‌دهند. شیمی نمیفهمم، اما عاشق وقتی هستم که درباره علوم حرف میزنی. حس میکنم موسیقی سرازیر میشود از دیوار خانه ها و یک آبشار از کلمات کنار من خواهد درخشید یا یک ابر از پنجره وارد میشود. به مقامی میرسم که غم را طلب میکنم وقتی تو را میبینم و به هر حال باید اکنون خداحافظی کنم. بنویس برای خودت یا برای دیگران آقای عزیز من باید به جاهای دیگر شهر سر بزنم. اشکالی ندارد مراقب کلماتی باشید که در بطن نامه ها هستند. پست چیه شهر من؟ منظورم شهری است که به آن هجرت کردم. آدم عجیبی است میداند که مرد تنهایی هستم. مدام از من میخواهد خلاف میلم بنویسم و میگوید هر چیزی را که میخواهی فراموش کنی داخل صندوق پست بگذار. The next poem that I wanted to read both in Persian and in English is a poem from the classic Iranian poet Hafiz Shirazi from 14th century. I'll read both in Persian, first in Persian and then in English. گل عذاری ز گلستان جهان ما را بس، زین چمن سایه آن سرو روان ما را بس. من و هم صحبتی اهل ریا دورم باد، از گرانان جهان رطل گران ما را بس. قصر فردوس به پاداش عمل می بخشند، ما که رندیم و گدا دیر مغان ما را بس. بنشین بر لب جوی و گذر عمر ببین، کین اشارات ز جهان گذران ما را بس. نقد بازار جهان بنگر و آزار جهان، گر شما را نبسین سود و زیان ما را بس. یار با ماست چه حاجت که زیادت طلبیم، دولت صحبت آن مونس جان ما را بس. از در خیش خدا را به بهشتم مفرست، که سر کوی تو از کون و مکان ما را بس. حافظ از مشرب قسمت گله ناانصافی است، طبع چون آب و غزلهای روان ما را بس. One rosy face from the world's garden for us is enough, and the shade of that one cypress in the field strolling along gracefully for us is enough. I want to be far away from people whose words and deeds don't match. Among the morose and heavy-hearted, a heavy glass of wine for us is enough. Some people say that good deeds will earn them a gated house in heaven. Being rakes and natural beggars, a room in the tavern for us is enough. Sit down beside the stream sometime and watch life flow past. That brief hint of this world that passes by so swiftly for us is enough. Look at the flow of money and the suffering of the world. If this glimpse of profit and loss is not enough for you, for us it is enough. The dearest companion of all is here. What else is there to look for? The delight of a few words with the sole friend for us is enough. Don't send me away from your door, oh God, even to paradise. Your alleyway compared to all space and time for us is enough. It's inappropriate, Hafiz, for you to complain of your gifts from fate. Your nature is like water. Your beautifully flowing poems for us is enough.
معصومه هستم، اهل کشور افغانستان. 2 شعر دارم برای خوندن، پناهنده و امید. اولین شعرم امید. کسی را میشناسی خنده بی درد بفروشد، میان کابوس کوچ و انتحار و بمب و شلیک گلوله به یک بیمار افسرده روانی شاد بفروشد. کسی را میشناسی مهر مادری بفروشد، میان گریه های کودک جامانده از جنگ کمی آغوش امن و خواب آسوده بفروشد. کسی را میشناسی صلح جای جنگ بفروشد، میان کشته های بیگناه بی سر و تن به آن معلول جنگی عضوی از بدن بفروشد؟ کسی را میشناسی گل دوستی بفروشد؟ به آن درمانده آواره بی سرپناه در شب تاریک و طوفانی کمی مهتاب بفروشد؟ کسی را میشناسی کمی مرهم بفروشد؟ به بالهای پرخون کبوترهای سرگردان به جای تیر و کمان مأمن و دانه بفروشد؟ کسی را میشناسی حق زندگی بفروشد؟ به جای ساخت هفتیر و مسلسلها و خمپاره جهانی عاری از خودخواهی و نفرت و کینه بفروشد؟ گلویم سخت خشکیده خریدار کمی آبم، میان ترس و تنهایی، میان گریه و زاری. کسی را میشناسی امید جای آب بفروشد؟ کسی را میشناسی امید جای آب بفروشد؟ پناهجو. دانید که را گویند پناهجو؟ آنکه ظالمانه خانه اش ویران شد، در هیاهوی رفتن و ماندن تابع حفظ جان عزیزان شد. آنکه چون شقایقی در خون تندیس آه داغ‌آلود بقا شد. آنکه غریبانه در این دنیا در پی آغوش گرم باران شد. آنکه چون نیلوفری در مرداب با نور مهربانی شیدا شد. پناهجو بال مجروحش را گشود تا امید تازه‌ای پیدا کند، در میان گرمی عاطفه ها مأمن انسانیت برپا کند، در خزان بی‌بهار زندگی نور عشق و همدلی احیا کند.
I Wouldn't Be Here is a poem that I wrote in a kind of reflection on my journey in Malaysia and back in Syria. So here it is. I wouldn't be here if the bullet behind me didn't bend, if the child in me never grew, if my friend wasn't my friend, if my home was a few kilometers further to the south, if I was a few years younger or a few years older. I wouldn't be here if my mother's soil wasn't fertile enough at 40, if she didn't take out her heart and planted it deeply into me. If my father's job was on the front line giving orders to shoot down the stars, if he didn't stitch his forearms into mine, I wouldn't be here if I didn't draw my first line onto the pavement, if I didn't sail on poetry's boat 10 years ago, if I didn't learn how to row, how to pray, how to beg, how to crawl, how to float. I wouldn't be here if my heart was built of stone and steel, if my body wasn't made of clouds, if my name didn't start with Abdul, if my skin wasn't white enough, if my voice wasn't loud enough, if I wasn't coward enough, fragile enough, scared enough, lucky enough. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't me enough. And the second poem is called 7 Days, and it goes like this. Day 7. My mind is floating somewhere between space and time. I can't remember the last time I touched my lungs, the last time I talked with my consciousness. Every day I bite my tongue just to remember I'm alive. Day 6. I'm tangled in a bed. My veins are connected to a long wire, dripping, a maze of gray walls and blue curtains, surrounded by whispers, familiar voices, and unfamiliar hands. Day 5. Everything feels out of motion today. The train, my legs, the clock, the sun. I reach home, rein myself, and sink myself in bed. I wake up in the middle of the night and sleepwalk towards a fainting light. Day 4. I'm having my morning coffee with someone I barely know. I read out a poem that I wrote a few days ago. He doesn't say a word or listens to anything I say. Day 3. I get rid of yesterday and tell myself, today is a great day. The sky is clear and the haze has faded away. I go to work free of all the poisons, of all the thoughts. Day 2. Where has everyone left? Who ripped off the windows? What's that blackness on the walls, and why are the owls hovering over my bed? I do not know why, but I know how. A voice echoes in my head. How whales get devoured by the sea, how castles collapse by a sting of a fly. Day 1. I'm writing a poem about the temporality of flesh and the immortality of words. The doorbell rings. A person in black stands in front of me, uninvited. He looks at me as if he knew me for a long time. I try to talk to him. He doesn't say a word or listens to anything I say. He ignores me, and he walks in through the back door of my mind.